The quarterly strategy meeting was already 40 minutes in when the VP of Product slapped his hand on the conference table and said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear through the glass walls, that someone had to take the fall for the Atlas project collapse. 14 senior employees sat around that table. Directors, managers, people who had fought for years to earn a chair in that room. Nadia Flores was not one of them. She was sitting in a chair against the wall, the kind of chair that wasn't really part of the meeting, the kind reserved for interns who were brought in to take notes and refill water glasses and stay quiet unless directly addressed. She had a legal pad on her lap and a pen in her hand, and she had not said a single word in the 6 months she had worked at Meridian Technologies in Denver, Colorado. Not one word. Not in meetings. Not in the break room when her name was mispronounced again. Not when she was handed projects that were clearly above her pay grade and then not credited when they were presented as someone else's work. She had learned early, the way that certain people in certain rooms always have to learn early, that silence was the price of staying. But that afternoon, something changed. The VP, a man named Gerald Whitmore, who wore his authority the way some men wear expensive watches, conspicuously and without occasion, was pointing at the head of engineering, who was pointing at the head of product, who was pointing at the project manager, who was pointing at a spreadsheet on the screen as though the spreadsheet were somehow responsible for the disaster on its own. Nobody was pointing at the real problem. Nadia had known what the real problem was for 4 months. She had written it up, actually. 8 pages, single-spaced, with data she'd gathered on her own time, charts she'd built at home on her personal laptop after her shifts ended, citations from 3 published engineering case studies, and 1 internal memo she'd been accidentally copied on that nobody had bothered to read. She'd printed it and placed it on the desk of her direct supervisor, a man named Preston Holt, who had picked it up, glanced at the first page and said, "Good effort, Nadia. I'll take a look when things slow down." Things never slowed down. The report had disappeared into the black hole of Preston's inbox. The problem it described had continued to grow, quietly, the way structural failures always do. Invisibly, steadily, until the morning you walk in and find the whole building has shifted off its foundation. That morning had arrived 3 weeks ago, when the Atlas project, a cloud integration platform that Meridian had spent 2 years and $19 million developing, failed its final beta test in a way that was catastrophic and very, very public. And now Gerald Whitmore was looking for someone to blame. Nadia kept her pen on the legal pad. She had been writing down everything said in this meeting because that was her job. Her handwriting was precise and unhurried. She had learned that too, how to stay steady on the outside when the inside was a different country entirely. She was 24 years old. She had graduated summa cum laude from Colorado State University with a degree in systems engineering. She had applied to 47 companies. Meridian had been the only one to offer her an internship. Not a full position, an internship, and she had accepted it because she needed the experience and the references, and because her mother had just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and the prescription costs were real, and the rent in Denver was real, and the math of her life did not give her the luxury of being selective. She had arrived at Meridian the previous April with a notebook, a clear mind, and the quiet certainty that if she worked hard enough and stayed invisible long enough, eventually someone would notice. She had spent 6 months learning that this was not how it worked. The people who got noticed at Meridian were the people who were already visible. Everyone else was furniture. Gerald Whitmore was now talking about accountability in a voice that vibrated with the kind of manufactured outrage that powerful men deploy when they want the room to feel that accountability is something happening to other people. "The bottom line," he said, "is that nobody caught this. We had 3 oversight teams and nobody caught it. How does that happen?" The room was quiet in that particular way of people who know the answer, but understand that saying it would be professionally fatal. Nadia put down her pen. She did not know what made her do it. Later, she would think about that moment a great deal. The specific gravity of it. The way it felt both inevitable and terrifying. Maybe it was the 6 months of watching other people get credit for work that was partly hers. Maybe it was the look on Preston's face right now, the practiced blankness of a man preparing to survive this meeting by sacrificing someone below him. Maybe it was simply that she was tired, bone-tired in the way that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the sustained effort of making yourself small in a space that was never designed for you. Whatever it was, she spoke. "I caught it," she said. The room turned. 14 heads swiveled toward the chair against the wall. The invisible chair, the furniture chair. Gerald Whitmore's eyes found her and stayed there with an expression that moved through several faces very quickly. Confusion, irritation, and then something more complicated. "I'm sorry," he said. Nadia did not repeat herself. She had learned from watching this room that repeating yourself was a form of apology, and she had nothing to apologize for. "I identified the failure point 4 months ago," she said. It was a synchronization lag in the API handshake protocol between the Atlas middleware and the legacy database infrastructure. Under normal load conditions, it was invisible. Under the stress testing parameters used in the beta, it compounded exponentially. I wrote it up in a report in September. 8 pages. I gave it to Preston. Every head in the room turned to Preston Holt. Preston's practiced blankness was no longer holding. "I'd need to look into that," Preston said. "I have a copy," Nadia said. "I always kept a copy." She opened the leather portfolio she brought to every meeting, the one nobody had ever asked her to open, and she took out 8 pages, stapled in the upper left corner, and she set them on the conference table in front of the nearest director, who picked them up with the slow, reluctant movement of someone reaching for something that is about to change their afternoon. The room went very still. Gerald Whitmore was reading. His expression was doing something unusual for a man of his particular type. It was recalibrating. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening to this story from. If HeartLine Stories has moved you today, please like, subscribe, and share this channel. Every subscriber tells us to keep bringing stories like this. Now, back to Nadia. She had grown up in Aurora, Colorado, 12 minutes from Denver depending on traffic, in a neighborhood where the parks needed new equipment and the school roofs needed new everything, but the teachers showed up anyway because that was the kind of people they were. Her father had driven a delivery truck for a regional grocery chain for 22 years. Her mother had worked as a medical billing specialist, a job that requires a particular kind of precision and patience, the ability to hold an enormous system in your head and find the exact place where it has gone wrong. Nadia had inherited that ability, though she'd spent her whole life watching it be underestimated. She had been the kid who fixed the computers in the school library when the IT budget ran dry. She had been the teenager who figured out why the neighborhood association's new irrigation system was flooding Mrs. Pacheco's garden every 3rd Tuesday. A timer calibration error that the contractor charged $300 to diagnose and that Nadia had seen in about 8 minutes. She had been the college student who stayed up past midnight in the systems lab, not because she had to, but because the problem in front of her was interesting, and she could not walk away from an interesting problem. She had come to Meridian with all of that. She had offered all of that, and for 6 months she had watched it sit in a desk drawer. Now, Gerald Whitmore set down the 8 pages and looked at her with an expression that Nadia had not seen directed at her once in her entire time at Meridian. He was looking at her like she was in the room. "Why didn't this reach me?" he said. He was not asking Nadia. He was asking the room, but the room was looking at Preston, and Preston was very carefully studying his coffee cup. "I submitted it through the appropriate channel," Nadia said, because it was true and because she was not going to soften it. "I have the date stamp, September 19th. The director who had taken the report passed it to the woman beside him, the VP of Engineering, Sandra Cho, who read it quickly in the focused way of someone who processes technical information for a living. Sandra looked up. She looked at Nadia. Then she looked at Gerald. "She's right," Sandra said. "This is exactly the failure mechanism. This is precisely what happened. The room breathed differently after that. Gerald Whitmore was a man who had spent 20 years being in charge of rooms, and he understood, the way people who have held power for a long time understand these things, when a room has shifted. He had come into this meeting looking for someone to blame. He had found something else instead. "Ms." he started. "Flores," Nadia said. "Nadia Flores." "Ms. Flores." He said it with a different weight now. "This report, the analysis here, the bandwidth modeling, the failure probability curves, this is graduate-level systems work." "Yes," she said. "It is." "You wrote this in September." "I did." "While working as an intern." "Yes." A long pause. Gerald looked at the report again. Then he looked at Preston again, a look that did not require any words to interpret. "I want to understand," Gerald said, still not looking away from Preston, "the process by which this document failed to travel 4 floors and land on my desk." Preston said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Sandra Cho spoke. "Gerald, I think we should take a short break." It was the kind of suggestion that isn't really a suggestion. The meeting broke. People filed out into the hallway. Nadia stayed in her chair because she was not sure what else to do, and also because her hands, now that she had set down her pen, were shaking very slightly, and she needed a moment for them to stop. Sandra Cho stayed too. She came and sat in the empty chair beside Nadia, a real chair, a meeting chair, the kind that sat at the table. And she looked at her directly and she said, "How long have you been here?" "6 months," Nadia said. "And you've been sitting in that chair the whole time?" "That's where they put interns." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know your name until today," she said. There was no excuse in her voice, just a statement of fact, offered with the kind of directness that Nadia found, unexpectedly, to be a relief. "Most people don't," Nadia said. "That's going to change." Sandra stood. She picked up the 8-page report from the table and tucked it under her arm. "I need you to walk me through this analysis. All of it. Today, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Nadia said. The walkthrough took 3 hours. It happened in Sandra's office, which had actual windows and a view of the mountains that Nadia had only seen from the parking garage until now. Sandra asked precise questions. Nadia gave precise answers. By the end of the second hour, 2 of Sandra's senior engineers had joined them, and they were no longer just reviewing the analysis. They were building the remediation plan. At 4:30, Sandra's assistant knocked and delivered a note. Sandra read it, set it on her desk, and looked at Nadia. "Gerald wants to meet with you tomorrow morning," she said. 8 o'clock. Nadia's stomach moved in a way she couldn't quite categorize, somewhere between fear and something warmer. "What for?" she asked. "I think," Sandra said, "because he has some things he needs to say to you, and because Meridian is going to need someone to lead the Atlas remediation project, and he's already made up his mind about who that person is." "I'm an intern," Nadia said. "You were," Sandra said. "As of this morning, you're a systems analyst, pending HR processing tomorrow. I pushed it through an hour ago." A pause. "You should have been here a year ago. We lost $19 million because you weren't." Nadia absorbed this. Outside the window, the mountains were doing what Colorado mountains do in October, going gold and purple in the late afternoon light, indifferent and enormous and somehow, right now, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Sandra said. "You earned this. You earned it in September, and nobody let you have it. I'm sorry it took this long." The meeting with Gerald the next morning was 12 minutes long. He said that Meridian had a problem with how it identified and developed talent. He said that he was aware this wasn't news to her. He said that he would be instituting a review of how intern contributions were handled, and that this was in no small part because of her. He offered her the lead analyst position on the Atlas remediation team, which would run for 18 months, and a salary that made Nadia's chest tighten when she heard the number because it was more than her mother made in a year, and it meant she could help with the prescriptions without anyone knowing she was helping, which was the only way her mother would accept it. She accepted the position. Preston Holt was moved to a different team. He was not fired. These things are complicated, and Meridian was not a simple organization. But he was moved somewhere where the distance between him and Nadia's trajectory was large enough to be comfortable. The Atlas remediation took 14 months. Under Nadia's lead analysis and the engineering team Sandra assembled, the platform was rebuilt from the API layer up. On the day it went live, a Thursday afternoon in December, almost exactly a year after the catastrophic beta failure, Sandra sent a company-wide message crediting the team. She put Nadia's name first, not last, not buried, first. Nadia was in the office when it went out. She read it on her laptop. Then she closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the particular stillness that follows something you've wanted for a long time finally arriving. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. "I got a work alert on my phone," her mother said. "Something about a big systems launch at your company. Are you involved in that?" "A little," Nadia said. A pause. "Nadia Elena Flores," her mother said, in the voice that meant she knew exactly how much a little was. "I know what you did." "Mom," Nadia started. "I'm proud of you," her mother said. Simply, without elaboration, the way her mother always said the things that mattered most. Nadia looked out the window at the mountains again. Same mountains, slightly different light, everything the same and everything different. She had spoken once in 6 months. She had said what she knew. She had kept her copy. That had been enough. Not because the world was fair. The world had not been fair to her, and it would not suddenly become fair. But because truth, when it is precise and documented and calmly delivered, has a weight that silence cannot hold back forever. She had carried it long enough. Now the room knew. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that your knowledge has value even when the room hasn't learned your name yet, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have a story of your own, write to us at heartlinestories@gmail.com. Every heart has a story worth telling. This is HeartLine Stories, where yours matters.